Hey there. I'm excited to announce this to you today. This is what you've been waiting for in your spiritual quest. This is something I've wanted to do for a long time, and I'm finally ready to announce it that it's ready to go. It's the Grief to Growth Community Circle. Now, this is a sanctuary where like-minded souls are united in their journey through grief and towards personal transformation. It's more than just a place. It's a beginning. It's a commitment to growth and understanding. Here you're finding not just a community, but you're entering a circle of trust and depth. You're going to engage with interactive coursework. You'll dive into exclusive podcast episodes and partake in discussions that illuminate the path from mourning to empowerment. This is a realm where every question is honored and every individual's journey is validated. To be part of this exclusive circle, visit us at grieftogrowth.com/community or look for the chat icon at the bottom of every page on the main website. Remember that entry is a privilege because I want to ensure that every member is as dedicated and genuine as you are. You must apply to join, but the journey within is worth every step. So go ahead and join us today. Check it out, grieftogrowth.com/community, and I look forward to seeing you there.
Hi there. Welcome to Grief to Growth Podcast. Your host is Brian Smith, spiritual seeker, best-selling author, grief survivor, and life coach. Brian believes that the worst tragedies of life provide the greatest opportunity for growth. Brian says he was planted, not buried, and he is here to help you grow where you've been planted by the difficulties in life. In each episode, Brian and his guests will share what has helped them to survive and thrive. It is his sincere hope this episode helps you today.
Hey, everybody, this is Brian Smith back with another episode of Grief to Growth. And I've got with me today a really fascinating guest. I can't wait to get into this conversation. Her name is Bridget Finklaire, and she is, I'm going to read her bio, and I've got literally 6 pages of notes to talk to her about. So I don't know how much we're going to get through, but I feel like we're kind of like-minded souls. Everything that she sent me, I'm really interested in. But she's an author, a spiritual teacher with almost 30 years of experience. She's qualified and experienced psychotherapist, hypnotherapist, and healer. She was a professional therapist in London's Harley Street. She left England in 2012 for Cape Town, where she now lives with her South African husband. She loves teaching, writing, and speaking. And weaving together the threads of her spiritual and professional journeys, she designed the Bone Circle, which is a unique, transformative, and life-changing program that ties together 3 significant areas of expertise: intuition and creation, the sacred and the metaphysical, and therapy and healing. Bridget has facilitated and taught many courses, including meditation, healing, dowsing, sacred geometry, and space clearing. She's also facilitated A Course in Miracles, created Truth Yoga, a return to yoga as a spiritual practice, and Freedom Dance, which is a free-form conscious shamanic trance dance. She currently facilitates a study group for the Book of Knowledge, the Keys of Enoch. And Bridget's intention is to awaken people to a higher purpose and a more joyful and harmonious life. She does this through creating awareness, providing a higher path of consciousness, teaching how to tap into intuitive wisdom, and setting up support groups that can work together powerfully to create positive change. Her favorite saying is an African one: if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. She believes we need to go together in supporting a new evolution in consciousness. And Bridget has just finished a new book, which is coming out, I think, the end of July in England and beginning of August in America. And it's called Red Dress. I'm sure we'll talk about that novel, which I guess covers a lot of the themes of Bridget's work. So with that, I want to welcome to Grief to Growth, Bridget Finklaire.
Thank you very much, Brian. It's lovely to be here. I'm really honored to be a guest, and thank you for that wonderful introduction.
Yeah, and as I was saying, your publicist sent me like 6 pages of notes. He said, pick a few topics that are interest to you, but they're all interesting to me. And it's really, you've done psychotherapy, you've done hypnotherapy, and somewhere in here talked about past life regressions. I just did a past life regression session a couple of weeks ago for the first time ever, and between lives. And you talked about A Course in Miracles. I just spoke to the Circle of Atonement group a couple of weeks ago. So there's a lot of overlap in our lives and our interests. I'm not exactly sure even where to start, but tell me more about yourself and how you got into all of this.
Oh my goodness, there's a story and a half. I think people who've been on a spiritual journey, it's very difficult to pinpoint where it started sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
I know for some people there's been some kind of big challenge in their lives, and that's what sort of shook them up and made them follow a spiritual path. But it wasn't necessarily like that for me. But when I look back on my life, there's probably lots of things that were signposts that were there right from the beginning of my life. I had a little imaginary friend when I was a child, and then I kind of just was told that it'd be ridiculous, but it's probably I was channeling something at the time, but I didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the real journey started when I had children. So I had my daughter when I was 30, it was in 1992. And I think when you become a parent, you start to see a new perspective on life, because it's not just about you anymore, is it? And I felt this tremendous responsibility to bring this being into the world. I then went on to have a son as well 2 years later. Mm-hmm. And that made me look at myself and say, how do I want to parent my kids? And I think that was the first real step in consciously looking at who am I, what am I here to do, and there must be more to life. I'd had touches upon that earlier in my life with difficult relationships where I would self-reflect. Is this me or is this them? And, trying to untangle things. And I think sometimes you can go into the psyche and it can be what I call a hall of mirrors. When you go into a fairground and you go into the hall of mirrors, and the mirrors are all very waving and they're distorting. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you can go into the mind and it's very, very distorting. So once I'd had my daughter, I actually went and had therapy because I just felt everything was so distorted inside me. I couldn't work out what was true and what was not. So I guess that really started my journey. And all the way along was this spiritual path as well. And it's step by step by step with me. I feel some people, they kind of go on the elevator of spiritual journey and something happens to them and they have some amazing awakening and they go straight to the top and boom, they're awake. And other people, it's a slow, slow journey. And for me, it's been one of those ones that's been a slow, slow journey. But it's gathered momentum hugely. Probably in the last sort of 20, 25 years, it's really gathered momentum. And in the last 10 years, 9 years I've been in South Africa, because I haven't been dealing with clients as a psychotherapist, I've had more time to write and to teach and to study and to really, really grow. And it's my belief that the more that we become aware and the more we raise our consciousness, the more we understand and read and self-reflect and all these wonderful tools that we have now, then we're letting go slowly of past layerings, past traumas. We're letting go of that stuff. And that for me is the ego, the conditioning. And you're letting go of that. And the more you let go of that, the more you're allowing your true luminous self to come through and guide you, which is that conscious being that we are. Yeah. This wonderful, greater self that I would call greater self.
Yeah, absolutely wonderful. And it's interesting. I had a guest on the other day, and I was saying that when I ask people to tell their stories, there's almost always some turning point. A lot of times it is tragic, but it doesn't have to be. And with you, it was the birth of your daughter, and I'd say that was one of the turning points in my life. Also, when my first daughter was born, it just really, as a parent, you just start to look at the whole world differently, and it changes, pretty much everything. Let's talk about consciousness, because, I think for you and I both, as after I was reading the notes that I got from your publicist, we both agree that consciousness is like what it's all about. So what is consciousness to you, and why is it so important? Why is it the key?
Oh, gosh, what a huge and wonderful question. Consciousness is more than just, I think, let's just say what it's not, rather than then we can maybe go into what it is. Because I think sometimes people think consciousness is the fact that we're alive. You can say that somebody's been knocked unconscious in the ring, right, in a boxing match, or that you're unconscious when you're on the operating theatre. So therefore, when you're alive and well and going around your business, you're conscious. But that's not what I mean. That's just a flow of sodium ions in your brain that are keeping you alive. That's not what I mean by consciousness. And I think that's the same for you as well. What I mean by consciousness is awakening and becoming aware of more than your five senses, of becoming aware of more than that treadmill life that we're kind of conditioned to live. Because I feel like humanity is a little bit of a sausage machine. You know, we're born and then we're expected to be a certain way. Mm-hmm. You know, we're expected to have certain beliefs, and we're having the thoughts and beliefs and conditioning of our own parents, of our religion, of our country, of our colour, of our race, of our creed, and all, and the time that we're born in, and all of these things are impinging upon us and moulding that small child mind that's taking it all on. And these become these conditioned responses that we're not even aware of. And it's for me, we're asleep. We're asleep to true reality. We're asleep to the moment. We're asleep to the beauty, actually, of creation. And we're asleep to all these things that I would say are unseen. So, you know, past lives, for example, between lives, spirit guides, angels, angelics, spiritual awakening. For me, spiritual means filled with the Spirit. That's the Holy Spirit. That's, for me, the presence of the divine. And so to become aware of that, in my life, I come across people who don't even believe there's anything happens at the end of their life. They think they die and that's it. And for me, I heard you say in the interview, absolutely, completely on the same song sheet as you. For me, death is not a death. It's a rebirth into something wonderful. It's just the soul going into its next container, if you like. It's going into its next incarnation, not as a physical, but into another space. It's a rebirthing into something glorious. So, but I meet people who just think that this life is that it's existential. We die and we're gone, and I don't believe that's true. And I meet people who just think everything is with the rational mind. It has to be provable. It has to be peer reviewed. It has to be something that they can count and quantify. And for me, consciousness goes way beyond that. We go into the spiritual mind. We go into the intuitive mind. We're connected actually to a greater mind, because I believe that our minds are almost like terminals of a computer on a greater mind. And what we tap into, we can tap into all kinds of incredible things, but we have to be still and empty out a little bit of the rubbish to be able to do that. So for me, it's an awakening and it's an awareness. And I think once you become aware, for example, that everything is one, everything is connected at the level of consciousness, that we are pure consciousness beings, then why would you go hurt somebody? You know, we live in a culture where there's a lot of war, there's a lot of crime, there's a lot of violence. Why? Because we feel separated, cut off, asleep. We're not aware. So for me, consciousness is the key to the evolution of humanity, because if we were all consciously aware of who we really are and what we're here to do, and that we're not alone, and that there is a vast cosmology out there with a whole hierarchy or holarchy of divinity out there, and that we have purpose, and that the challenges in life are there for us to grow. This is schoolhouse earth. And if we all had that awareness and we were all here to support each other and really understood that what I do to you, I'm doing to myself. And when I get angry, I'm just projecting something from inside of myself, and to work on ourselves and become conscious, I think that would just change humanity. If you look at the problems of the world, it really takes consciousness to rise above them. So, sorry, long waffling answer, but it's a big subject.
It's a big question, and I've kind of evolved to the point of, similar to what you said. I look at everything as and all these things. I read different things. They're all kind of saying the same thing. But Paul Tillich called God the ground of all being, and yes. I view that's consciousness. And there's a guy interviewed on my show, Dr. Bernardo Kastrup, that has a concept. Promotes a concept called idealism, which says that consciousness is pretty much everything, and the material arises out of that. So once we start to understand that consciousness is everything, then it just creates, like you said, that greater cosmology, that bigger picture, and that we are literally all one. It's not just a figure of speech, but we are all part of this greater consciousness. There's one mind, and then we are little nodes, as you said. We're little nodes that we individuate, but we're still connected, and we walk around thinking that we're separate when we're not, and we could not exist without each other.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hey there, something I want to tell you about today. My podcast platform, Buzzsprout, has recently made it easier for me to allow you to support me financially. Go to www.grieftogrowth.com/subscribe. That's grief2growth.com/subscribe. And once you're there, you can sign up to support me financially. Now, you can do it for as little as $3 a month, or of course, as much as you'd like. If you do that, you'll get access to bonus episodes, and you'll see those in the regular feed. They'll have a lock on them. But when you become a subscriber, you'll actually get access to your own private feed, and you'll be able to listen to the regular podcast along with the bonus podcast for the subscribers. I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank you for sharing the podcast. And I want to thank those of you who support me financially. Have a great day, and on to the episode.
Totally. I totally agree with you. And I think consciousness to me is life. And at the quantum level, we really are connected. And at the consciousness level, we are connected. Mm-hmm. And we know that matter, we know this from quantum physics. This is where spirituality meets science. We know from quantum mechanics and quantum physics that everything is connected. That everything comes from a waveform before it becomes a particle. Things come from light, actually, from photons. So we're seeing that there's so much more that we don't understand. And well, how fascinating to try and dip into that and understand it. When you talked about the ground of all being, I agree with you. I think for me, the ground state of all being is love, which encompasses consciousness and light and intelligence. And that obviously goes beyond our earthly understanding of love. I think there's more for us to understand as we continue to grow.
Yeah.
Which is why I always say love is the way. That's my...
Yeah. And it's so funny. It sounds so hippie-ish, but that's what every near-death experiencer comes back and tells us. It's all about love. It's all about love. It's all love. And these are synonyms, consciousness, love, source, God, ground of being. These are just words that we use to try to express something that's really, inexpressible. Another thing you said I thought was really, really interesting. You said we live in a duality, and you said we are a greater self and we have a smaller self. Could you expand on that? I think that's brilliant. Yeah.
So interestingly, I'm going to backtrack to give a bit of background to how I get to where that is.
Please.
So I grew up in England, and I didn't grow up in a religious family at all. I mean, I think most Church of England English people are not very religious. They just go to church for weddings and funerals.
Right.
So in a way, that was a massive blessing for me, because I didn't have that indoctrination of a religion, the dogma of a religion. So having now gone on this huge spiritual journey, I'm able to come back to scripture, the Bible, but also Eastern scriptures, and I'm able to come back to scripture with a spiritual mind, and it's fascinating. Mm-hmm. So, and I've kind of dipped into Kabbalah and Eastern scripture and the Bible as well, and other teachings like the Nag Hammadi and all sorts of things. And it always go back to, when we talk about duality, the Garden of Eden, where Adam and Eve are in the garden, and there's all these different trees, and it's a metaphor for the trees of life, the Kabbalistic trees of life, which have these sephirotic emanations, which are divine personality or divine aspects, if you like,
right.
A better word. And they choose to eat from the tree of good and evil, not the tree of life. So they go into, now there are many, many, many trees of creation, and they go into the tree of good and evil. Now, good and evil is already a duality now. We're in black and white, good and evil, right and wrong, and everything in our life has this polarity in this system of things where we live. I don't say that that's there in the greater cosmos, because I think it's only our local universe which is in that sort of duality. Mm-hmm. But that's what it means: hot and cold, up and down, east and west, north and south. But of course that duality or polarity creates a lot of friction in life, and it creates a lot of arguments. And we can see that playing out so hugely in the world right now, where really we need to unite and realize we're one and work together. But then now people are against each other. Should we have the vaccine or not? And is it this or that, and conspiracy or not? And there's all these kind of dualities that are playing out. And in amongst that, what I would say is that we're actually conflicted beings, because we ourselves also have this dual nature. And I think when we're born and before we awaken and before we have any kind of awakening experience or any kind of spiritual journey, whatever that is, we believe that we are the small self. And for me, the small self is the one that, as I said, is conditioned in childhood. Now, look, that's going to be different for different people. Some people had a wonderful childhood, and their conditioning is going to be less harmful, shall we say, than somebody, say, who had horrific childhood. So, and then there's also resilience and there's so many factors that we're unaware of. But for everybody's experience is different. But at the end of the day, even if you had a fabulous childhood, you will still be conditioned. And so it's like laying down programs in a computer. You know, the mind of the child is completely wide open till about the age of 5. Now they're actually saying now maybe 7 in an alpha brainwave state, which is a learning programming state. We kind of know this even from Freud, who said, 5 years, first 5 years. So, and now we know even more about that with neuroscience. So in those first 5 years of life, all of these things, we're basically learning how to survive. We're learning how to please the people that will look after us so that we're viable. We're learning how to fit in with society, how to fit in at school, how to fit in with our culture, and we're learning the ropes, and we're learning it from the people that went before us. And that's laid down just like putting programs on your computer or putting apps on your phone. They're just there, and we don't even question them. They're just there, and we run them. And I don't think people understand how deeply conditioned we are. Now, that conditioning, as I said, it can be really detrimental. People can be in horrible trauma, and that really stifles them for their life until they've been able to heal that trauma and overcome it and move forward. And I think actually a spiritual path is a very powerful way to do that, because you'll be guided by a higher mind. But yeah, so the duality is that you have this smaller self. Now, even in someone who's had a wonderful upbringing, we often find these kind of negative beliefs that play out. Most of humanity get focused on negative beliefs. Now, the reason for that, if we look at the psychology of it, is that our subconscious mind is there to keep us safe and to help make sure that we stay alive. It's not there to make us thrive. It's there for us to survive. And survival goes into the fight or flight response. So babies are all born with a fear of falling and a fear of loud noises. Now, when we have that fear that kicks in, whatever it is, we'll go into either fight, flight, or freeze. That's the only 3 things that we're wired to do in that small self. And that creates, so if it's fight, it's anger. If it's flight, it's fear. And if it's freeze, it's actually you're giving your power away to somebody else and hoping something else will protect you. And at that point, you're not in your power, and that leads to depression. So these are the 3 kind of core negative values, but emotions, and out of that stem all the other things. So if you're mildly frustrated, it's actually a form of anger. And those are the emotions that come from the small self, when the ground state of being, which is love, and all the wonderful things come from that, like joy and peace and all of those things, happiness, when that's blocked, and it's blocked by this survival mechanism. So people then can wind up thinking, well, I'm not good enough to do this, or I don't really belong, or I haven't got the power to do it, or I'm not allowed to do that because somebody will tell me off, or who am I to do this, little old me, I'm insignificant. And I actually work with 12 key core beliefs that everybody has at varying degrees. And those things run the show often. So a lot of times people want to do something, and the small self goes, well, but you can't do that. And it's often like in mum's voice or dad's voice or Uncle Joe's voice or something, like that, or your teacher's voice. You can't do that. And that stops us, and it keeps us limited. And it really goes back into what we were saying about consciousness, because I think as you become more consciously aware, you become aware of your own conditioning, and you become aware of the voice that goes, you can't do that, for example. And then you go, well, actually, let's question this. Who's saying I can't do this? And in stillness, I think in meditation is important, and prayer, any kind of stillness. In stillness, in nature as well, those sorts of things, we're able to bypass that conditioned mind and catch glimpses of a taste of honey. We catch glimpses of the intuitive mind. We catch glimpses of glory and beauty, and we can look at a sunset or a rainbow or a waterfall or a child at play and see fully present in that moment just the absolute beauty and perfection of creation. And when we're doing that, we're tapping into something more. And I think that each of us are also, as well as the conditioning that we get in early childhood, we're also born with gifts, talents, and skills and passions. And those are part of our greater self. and where these, and interesting, you talked earlier about near-death experience, because most people who have near-death experience say that they're large and luminous and huge and they can't imagine fitting back into their tiny body.
Right, right.
And that they can see 360 degrees and they can be anywhere at any time. And they see how beautiful they are, how enormous they are, how incredible they are at that level. And all that this body is our little earth suit. It's our container that we're in. And so my belief is that we are that bigger self, that greater self. We are our gifts and talents and skills and passions and what we've come here to do and be and who we are and what we've come here to learn. That's who we really are. And then we have this small self. And the reason we have a small self is it's the small self that's actually the suit, isn't it? It's the small self that, say, knows how to work the keyboard to type the book.
Right,
or,
right.
you know, but it's the greater self that will write the book. It's the greater self that inspires you to write the book. When Mike has a red dress, but it's my little self here that had to actually sit there at the typewriter and type red dress. So This is how normally people just think that they're the small self and they forget the greater self. Or sometimes if they're aware of a greater self, they think, I am a small self and I've got a greater self and it's up there somewhere and it's completely detached from me. And what I'm saying is, no, you are this bit, but you have this bit. And when you understand that, those two parts of you, rather than being in conflict in this duality, you need to do this, no, I can't, can actually work together in synergy.
Yeah. That was so well put. You know, and I did grow up with the religious background, and you're kind of taught that I am a body and I have a soul. And that, so when I die, my soul is either going to go to heaven or hell, but my soul is something that's separate. And that's the way I think most people, we either think we're just a body, which is the materials point of view, or I am a body and I have a spirit, as opposed to I am a spirit and I have a body. And the term I've come to use lately is, I call this an avatar. So this is like a virtual reality, and my greater self is actually manipulating this. And I always, every time I get in this conversation, I always have to put in a plug for the ego, because the ego gets such a hard time by spiritual people. We have to kill the ego. The ego is a terrible thing. I need to destroy my ego. The ego is here to keep us in the avatar. The ego is here to keep the avatar safe. And the ego, we need to have the ego serve that greater self. The ego should be in our service as opposed to being in control. And once we understand this duality, if you want to call it a duality, once we understand that, this body this is important and we got to take care of it. And that's what the ego's job is to do. And I've heard people say, oh, I shouldn't fear this. I shouldn't feel this way. Well, it's actually, you said it was kind of functional, but it's also biological. It's evolutionary, because we look for the negative, because that's our caveman saying, we got to look out for the saber-toothed tiger. We've got to look out for danger. So we're biologically pre-programmed for that. It's not a bad thing, but we just have to learn to get control of it. So I love the way you talked about that. And I really hope people can grasp that concept, because I think it's like the key to really living an integrated life between our ego and our greater self.
I totally agree with you. I couldn't agree with you more. And I feel like the ego is our vehicle of orientation. It's the ego that keeps us safe and that keeps us going. And it's this small body that actually has to do the work at the end of the day. We've volunteered as well. At the soul level, we chose to come into this life. And we chose the parents we had, and we chose the major traumas, and we chose them to learn and grow at soul level. So absolutely agree with you. And also remember, we do need to look after our body, because it's the temple of the soul. It's the container that we've got right now. It's like having a car. You're not going to let your car rust on your driveway. You're going to look after it and polish it and clean it and put petrol in it and have it serviced, because you want to keep it going. And it's the same with our bodies. We should honor those. And I just want to pick up on what you were saying about the feelings. I think a lot of people think, we've got to get rid of all these negative feelings. But you're never going to get rid of the negative feelings. And that's not what I teach. What I teach is, it's natural and normal to have all those negative feelings. They are part of our survival. They are part of our programming. It's not to beat ourselves up or feel guilty or shameful that we got them. It's to just become aware that they're not always a true north. They're not always a true reflection of reality. Because sometimes we can panic, can't we? Can panic that, oh, somebody's going to, I'm going to fail at that interview with Brian, something like that, like, oh my goodness, he might just be grilling me. And we can have those thoughts. Everybody, I'm sure, can relate to those kinds of thoughts, and just using that as an example. Sure. But it's not about getting rid of those thoughts. It's about going, yeah, it's almost like a child, isn't it, who's asking for a biscuit constantly. And then, you don't say the cookie, in America, asking for a cookie. And you've got to acknowledge that child and either say, yes, you can have one later, or yes, here it is, or no, you can't have a cookie, they're bad for you. But if you ignore the child, it keeps going, can I have a cookie, can I have a cookie, can I have a cookie? And the mind is a bit like that. And you can't just ignore those feelings. You've got to listen to them, and you've got to go, okay, I acknowledge that's there. I acknowledge that this is going on for you, and it's true for you, and it's real for you, but I'm just here to tell you, you've got this, it's okay. And you don't have to act on that fear.
Right.
And you can choose to have a different thought. You can choose to say, yeah, of course, I'm scared about whatever it is, I'm worried about whatever it is, and that's okay, and I acknowledge that, and I hear you, and I understand why, but hey, we've got a greater self, and hey, we can choose to acknowledge that, and then choose something different, choose to believe something different, choose to enjoy this interview, because we've got lots of things in common, and it's going to be great fun. And it's always a choice.
Yeah. And that's the thing, when we're operating from the ego, from the pre-programmed things unconsciously, then we don't realize we have a choice. And so what are some ways that we can learn to realize that we have a choice, to start to learn to choose our thoughts, to choose, and to recognize, okay, this emotion, I know I have it, but it's not reflecting reality.
We'll get back to Grief to Growth in just a few seconds. Did you know that Brian is an author and a life coach? If you're grieving or know someone who is grieving, his book, Grief to Growth, is a best-selling, easy-to-read book that might help you or someone you know. People work with Brian as a life coach to break through barriers and live their best lives. You can find out more about Brian and what he offers at www.grieftogrowth.com, www.growth.com. If you'd like to support this podcast, visit www.patreon.com/grieftogrowth, www.patreon.com/GRIEF2GROWTH to make a financial contribution. And now back to Grief to Growth.
So how do I get to that point?
Yeah, that's a great question. Again, it goes back to consciousness, doesn't it? It goes back to consciousness and awareness, because most people get caught in the turmoil of their feeling and thought. So they're angry or they're afraid, and that's it. They don't consider that they might be mistaken on something, or that it might be generated from inside of themselves. Often I used to see this a lot when I was a therapist with clients, that they'd be angry about something that somebody else had said to them. And then you kind of have to unpack that and stop, hang on a minute. And so I think the only way that people can begin to even start on that journey of realizing there's a choice is to first of all become aware of what they're thinking and feeling. That's the very first thing, to become aware. I'm angry because somebody said something that's upset me, say, for example. And then you've got to stop and kind of take some time out for reflection and go, it's okay to be angry. I don't need to bury that or, deny it. It's okay to be angry, but what am I angry about? Why am I angry? Well, because she said X. Well, why did that make me angry? Dig a bit deeper. Why did that make me angry? Well, because da-da-da. And it always goes back to something. It's never to do with what that person said in this moment now. It's always to do with something from the past. And then you can uncover it a little bit. So the first thing is becoming aware, and that's really self-reflection, self-inquiry. And, if it's too strong, because I know a lot of people have been through trauma and those emotions are way too powerful for them to stop and go, what's happening? Because they're going into amygdala hijack, where the reptilian brain is basically taken over. And it's very, very difficult and challenging. And that's the point where I would say, think about working with someone that you trust and that you like, with a technique that you like, to start working through that. And do you know what? We don't have to kind of go into old school psychotherapy and talking and all of that stuff now, because we've got fabulous techniques nowadays. NLP, hypnosis, EMDR, EFT, the tapping. I mean, there's so much out there that we can work with quickly to just release trauma from the past. So we can go, okay, that was a trauma, it's really horrible. I've now processed it, because the trauma's held in the whole of the nervous system. So you get triggered by things. So you got to process that trauma so you can put it to bed. Then when things come up, you're able to kind of stand and go, okay, what's happening for me? And be curious. Or work with things, or go for a walk. Movement's great. That's why I love the conscious dance and yoga. But even just walking in nature. If you're feeling really angry or really upset or really afraid about something, you go for a walk in nature. And you start moving and walking, and your mind will start processing it. So it always comes back to awareness. Become aware. When you become aware of what's happening, then you've got choice. If you're not aware, you've got no choice, because you're being run.
Yeah, exactly. And it's something that I found really works. And I know people sometimes really bristle at the word, is meditation or mindfulness, just sitting and becoming really aware of your thoughts, and realizing that you can choose thoughts, just like, okay, here's a thought. I'm going to choose not to have that. And it's like, oh, wow, I can do that. Because not only do we think we're our bodies and our egos, we also think we're our thoughts. And we literally don't realize until we practice this mindfulness that, yeah, I can choose my thoughts, which therefore start to kind of help influence our emotions. And, when I learned that anger is a part of fear, that it's literally like, I feel like I'm being attacked. So now when I start to feel anger, I'm like, why am I fearful? And it's my ego. It's my ego saying, you're making me feel less than, and no one can make me feel that way. I'm choosing that. And then I can choose not to be angry. So it's really cool once you start to put all this stuff together, and it starts with just knowing the kind of the cosmology, or how we're made.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hi there. I'm really excited to tell you about my latest ebook. It's 4 lessons that you can learn from the near-death experience without going through all the trouble of dying to learn them. I've been studying NDEs for several years now. I am completely convinced that not only are they 100% real, but that there's some very universal wisdom that we can get from the near-death experience. And I've distilled that down in this book into 4 short lessons. And I've also given you all the reasons why I believe that NDEs are absolutely real. So go to www.grieftogrowth.com/NDE lessons to pick it up for free. www.growth.com/NDE lessons. I hope you enjoy it.
Absolutely, completely agree with you. The buttons are on the inside, aren't they? If somebody's pushed your buttons, they're on. Exactly. You don't go around with buttons all over you. The buttons are on the inside. Meditation as well. I think that's probably the single most powerful tool that anybody can take up. I've been meditating for about 21 years. I think I read a book about meditation in 1999. I started seriously in 2000. And we're now 2021. So 21 years of meditation. Mm-hmm. I could not have gone through the things that I've gone through without that practice. It's such a powerful thing. It's one of those ones, isn't it? It's simple. Oh, just sit there and don't think of anything. It's an easy concept. It's difficult to do. But of course it's difficult to do, otherwise we'd all be meditating all the time. And the point is, you practice just the same as when you go to the gym and you practice your press-ups, or you practice your yoga posture, or whatever it is you're practicing, swimming, I don't know, whatever you do, you practice it. Play the violin. You're not going to play the violin perfectly first time. And it's the same with meditation. It's a practice. It's a practice and a discipline. But wow, I think that the payoff and the results of that, the rewards of that practice are huge in so many ways. And that's one of them, is to become aware of your own thoughts.
Yeah. For me, I've been practicing meditation seriously now for probably about 6 or 7 years, and for the last 4 years, I meditated every day. I meditate every day, and I tell people it's like brushing your teeth. You don't skip a day of brushing your teeth. It's training your mind, and it pays off in ways that it takes a while. It's like, it doesn't happen at once. It's like going to the gym though, right? When you first go to the gym, you don't come out and you're super strong, the first day, but it builds up over time. So, it's really, like I said, for people, I noticed in the notes, you also said there are people want quick fixes, and, the books that really sell, or the self-help books, are like 30 days to a better you, or 7 days to a better you, or how to whatever in 3 minutes, but the thing is, that word keeps coming up over and over again: practice. It's a matter of discipline.
Discipline and practice. Absolutely. Yeah. Discipline and practice. And the meditation is a slow burn. It's not like you're going to see results straight away, but actually I think people do feel less stressed pretty soon on, within a month or so. Mm-hmm. But keep going, because it is amazing. It's actually something that I put in Red Dress when I wrote that the character in there, Katie, meditates. And I even actually say in there how she meditates, because everything in Red Dress is real. So if people want to just learn a very, very simple meditation, can read a novel and learn from it. So there's a lot of things she does that are great practices, and we're just seeing inside her mind. She's doing it for us so that we can follow and learn along. And meditation is one of those key things. Yeah.
And we've been talking a lot, kind of rationally. But you have a quote here from Einstein, which I hadn't heard before, and I love it. And I have to start off by saying I'm a by nature a rational person. My degree's in chemical engineering. I looked at the universe as mechanical, deterministic, and I'm coming to this understanding about intuition and how magical everything really is. And I love this quote. Einstein said, "The intuitive mind is a sacred gift, and the rational mind is a faithful servant. We have created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift." So could you expand on that quote and why you like that?
I just think it's fabulous that somebody like Einstein, who, we all think of Einstein as being this incredibly brainy person who's, physicist, mathematician, scientist. And so we don't think about him talking about the intuitive mind, but actually he was highly intuitive. I think he had another quote, actually, it's reminding me of it, something like, knowledge is something like 2% knowledge and 98% inspiration. Mm-hmm. And he was known to meditate towards the end of his life. And I think that's how he became so hugely successful, because he did use the intuitive mind. Interesting that you were saying that you had a rational background. And my father was an engineer, and I grew up with 4 brothers, and they're all very, very rational. So, of course, I'm just the silly little girl who doesn't know anything. I'm the one who had the wacky intuitive mind. And I tried to suppress that for a long time and be very rational. But I think the secret really is we need both. It's a little bit like when we talked about greater self and small self. We need both. We need to have a rational, logical mind as well to understand how things work, to be organized in life, to remember to get on the podcast, and to remember to make sure that the earphones work, and how to use Zoom and all these things. I've got to go shopping to get some food, and I know how, and I need to put petrol in my car, and I need to schedule things. And so we do need a rational mind. And I think now we do need to also have an inquiring mind and not just accept things, particularly with the times we're living in. We're living in very, very interesting times, a real opportunity in these times. But we have to sit and think for ourselves, because there's a lot of fake news going on both sides of the fence. So we have to really kind of unpack things and use the rational mind. Of course, we need the rational mind, but I don't think it's the be all and end all. And and this is what Einstein's saying, that we've created a society that thinks that rational mind is the be all and end all. So even if we're looking now at, somebody's more likely to believe a peer-reviewed paper about something than somebody who gets an intuitive hit about something. Now, the problem with peer-reviewed papers is it means all of your peers all agree to the same thing. So you've all come to the same conclusion. Well, by the time you've gone down that road to come to that same conclusion, you're very much channeled into or deeply ingrained into the rational mind, and it doesn't leave any space for insights and inspiration to come in, because that's what the intuitive mind does. The intuitive mind is creative, inspiring, it has ideas, it fits things together, it's expansive, it's I think it's the intuitive mind that is also the spiritual mind that does connect to that higher consciousness and that higher mind. It's the intuitive mind that brings you inspiration when you've been meditating, or allows you to see the workings of your own mind. Eckhart Tolle talks about this, and he realizes I am depressed. There must be another I looking at the I. So there's that observing witness,
Right.
which is part of that intuitive mind. And I think that we have, as with everything, we have to get everything in balance and get it to work together. So just the same as you've got a greater self and a smaller self, and you have to get them to work together, it's the same with the rational mind and the intuitive mind. You need the intuitive mind in balance with the rational mind. And when you've got that left and right brain, the intuitive and the rational in perfect balance, you're in balance between head and heart, you're in balance, and then the greater gift comes in, which is the gift of spirit, which awakens us.
Yeah.
So it's such a powerful thing, because I think we've gone into really, even since Einstein said that quote, we've gone further and further and further into a society that values the rational and dismisses and belittles the sacred gift of the intuitive mind.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And it's interesting because as I've studied those scientists around Einstein's time, Einstein, Tesla, Max Planck, those guys, Heisenberg, it was intuition that led them to these big leaps in knowledge, and then they worked out the details behind it. And they looked for beauty in nature. They looked for simplicity. They looked for balance. And when man first started developing the scientific method, it was because we believed in a rational universe. We believed a rational God would create a rational universe. So we thought these things could be found out. And then we went so far down that rabbit hole that we threw out the whole idea of God or creator or source, whatever word you want to use, and said it's all about the material. But these guys that made these huge breakthroughs, 100, 200 years ago, they were still very intuitive. And you mentioned earlier that we value peer-reviewed papers over intuition. I go even farther. We value that over our own experience. We can have an experience of the divine, and then we'll dismiss it because we'll say it's not possible. We'll get a sign, or we'll even have a vision or something, and we'll say, well, that was just my imagination. That was just wishful thinking. Or people like yourself or myself, people will say, well, they're woo-woo. They're really out there. They're not rational people. Which I believe that intuition actually goes beyond rationality. It's not irrational. It's not sub-rational. It's actually super rational. It goes beyond what we can understand with our minds. And when science now tells us, well, for example, time is an illusion. There is no time. That makes no sense to me rationally. It's like I experience time every day, but that's what they're telling. That's beyond what I can imagine. And where they talk about different dimensions, third, fourth dimension, fifth dimension. There are theoretically 11 dimensions. Our minds can't even grasp that. So the rational only takes us so far, I guess is my point. It only takes us to a certain point, and then we've got to take a leap of faith and understand that there's something beyond the rational.
Completely. I completely agree with you. Even if you go back further with science, if you go back to Newton, who discovered gravity. When did he discover it? When he was sitting under a tree and the apple fell. When he's in a contemplative space, in his intuitive mind. And I like how you said it's like the super rational. For me, it's like almost like super consciousness. The intuitive mind is like super consciousness. Wonderful things. There's lots of things that we could go into there with eternality and time is an illusion and different dimensions, which are all kind of areas that I love to talk about. But what I want to touch on, because I saw in the notes again that Gavin sent me, your publicist sent me, there's so much. Again, people will sometimes look at people like yourself and myself and say we're not being rational, we're not being realistic. But science, I actually have this vision of scientists coming up the mountain, and they get to the top, and there's the philosophers and the theologians sitting there going, we told you guys this like 1,000 years ago. Because we're starting to come back around to it with things like quantum mechanics and the idea that time is an illusion. I mean, Einstein even talked about that. It's, he envisioned the universe as everything is happening at once, or everything has already happened, however you want to view it. And we just kind of go through it with this different perspective. So I noticed one of the notes you had was future science and the science of spirituality. I love that term, the science of spirituality. Yeah, because it's where quantum physics starts meeting science. And, we can, just to talk about going back into the rational mind and the intuitive mind, you could look at that, say, in a spiritual way. And you could say the sixth chakra or the third eye is really it's to do with seeing, but it's also the rational mind. But we need to jump beyond that into the crown chakra, which opens up to the higher mind. So you could look at it that way, or you can look at it with science. So I think there's a project out at the moment called a piece of scientific study that came out recently called the Blue Brain Project. And this is scientists leading edge, and they've discovered that within our minds, we have multi-dimensional geometries going on in our minds. And you go, okay, well, why is that? Why do we have multi-dimensional geometries going? And it's because we are able to go beyond time and space. So look, you were talking earlier about past life regression. When you go into a past life regression, you're going back in time to another life. And how's that possible? Unless time is an illusion. So one of the ways I used to try and explain that to people is I know we all stream things off Netflix these days, but for those of you who remember DVDs or even just flash drives with films on, the entire film is on there, isn't it? Beginning, middle, and end. The whole thing's on there. But we have to watch it through time and space. We have to watch it from the beginning, 2 hours of film to the end to get the whole story. But yet it's all there. And I think that's a kind of analogy we could use for time and illusion and the mind, that it's all there. Your past life is there, our present life is there, and it's all happening at once, but it would drive us bonkers if that happened. So it's veiled from us. So we don't see that, but we're actually able to tap into different times and spaces. And then what you reveal in that past life or heal in that past life actually affects you in the present, which then affects the future going forward. So it's not just a DVD, it's like an interactive DVD that you can reprogram. So I find that fascinating. And the other scientific use, I think, of looking at this thing of multidimensionality and also this higher mind is when we talk about remote viewing. So remote viewing is something that's very scientific. It was there's a book by Dr. Elizabeth Rauscher, which, if you want to read it, good luck with it, because it's extremely scientific. And it's called Mind Dynamics in Space, which was written by her and Dr. Hurtak. And it talks about their experiments with a guy called Russell Tarker, I think it was at MIT, where they remote viewed. And they had these three guys that were really brilliant at doing it. And they'd put them in a room and they'd give them some coordinates somewhere. And they'd go and they'd be in an office somewhere and they'd be able to read the files in the filing cabinet, or they'd be able to draw what something looked like in another part of the world. Or then they've discovered that sometimes they draw something that wasn't there, and then they go and investigate and find out that thing that they drew that wasn't there used to be there in the 1930s or something like that. So you think, how is this possible? So there's so much more. And so, I'm really fascinated by the science of spirituality, because I think it is then bringing together the rational mind and the intuitive mind. So, because you see, people can think we're a bit woo-woo, can't they? We're a bit airy-fairy, and, if we talk about sort of angels, say, or angelics, or the divine, or past life experiences, or near-death experiences, it's sometimes too much for people to take on board, and that's because of cognitive dissonance. They've got a belief that's very inculcated in them that all these things don't exist, and you're giving them evidence that it does, and they can't equate the two, so they'll reject it. And they reject it out of fear, because it would have to mean that they'd have to unpick what they believe. So you have to be gentle with people, and those who have ears to hear will hear. But I think there's a rising and there's an awakening going on, and more people are coming into this space. So it's really nice to also be able to look at the science of spirituality and look at what's happening in quantum physics, what's happening with the Blue Brain Project, what's happening with multidimensional geometries in our mind, and that all these dimensions. There's some fabulous mathematicians at the moment who are saying the physical world creation is so perfect, it had to come from a divine mind, because
absolutely.
there's a perfection in the geometries, in the numbers, in the mathematics. And there's one guy, and I can't remember his name, but he just sees the whole world as just this perfect mathematics and logarithms, and that's mind blowing. So it's wonderful to be able to go full circle, if you like, with, we've got the science this side and the spirituality that side, and it kind of goes full circle and touches. And I find that really fascinating to delve into.
Well, I find interesting is we as mankind have such a short memory. So we think that we've been materialists forever. We've been materialistic atheists, which is kind of the dominant mindset of the day. But for most of mankind's history, we've been very spiritual. We've been tapped into these things, and we've taken them for granted. And I find it interesting because us woo-woo people, a lot of us are turning now back to old practices, shamanism and yoga, and studying these things that have been around for thousands of years. Because we've kind of lost our way, and we've come into this mindset that says, if I can't see it, if I can't touch it, if I can't test it in a lab, then it can't be real. Whereas that's a very modern mindset that we've only had for a little while. But we're all, some of us are like so excited. Oh, science is going to prove this now. Whereas these are things we've taken for granted for most of our existence. So again, as a scientist, even myself, I'm excited when we can prove it, but I'm not waiting around for them to prove it because there's just way too much evidence. And, I was talking to someone and they're like, there's no evidence for any of this. And I said, okay, let me give you a couple of things to read. Go look up Dr. Gary Schwartz and his research on mediums, and go look up Dr. Julie Beischel and her research on mediums, and then get back to me, because they've written peer-reviewed papers that have shown that mediumship is at least tapping into consciousness that we can't understand. And the guy comes back to me after about 15 minutes and goes, oh, this is talking about mediums. Mediumship isn't real. Therefore, I'm not going to bother reading it. And I'm like, that is not a scientific approach. A scientist would examine the evidence. And when you examine the evidence, there's just tons of it out there. There's so much. And you've touched on some, I've touched on some. So when people, call us woo-woo or say you're wishful thinking, I just kind of snicker. And I've told people, I will give you reasons to why I believe what I do if you want to hear them. But you're right. A lot of people just aren't open to it yet. They're caught up in this paradigm that we've fallen into, which I believe is the root. You talk about the root of all evil. It's the idea that we've forgotten who we are.
Absolutely. Yeah, completely. I think it's sort of probably come from, things like the Renaissance period and then the Industrial Revolution. Mm-hmm. And then it's sort of pushed us into that very, very rational mind. But we are rediscovering ancient wisdom for a modern world, aren't we? And I think we can also look to the indigenous cultures, because they carry these sort of like wisdom teachings with them. And we can learn a lot from that. And again, something else that people dismiss. But I think, they probably laugh at the Western society in the way that we live. So there's a lot of wisdom there. And I think people need to just be open and curious. Like you were talking about the books that you recommended. It's just about going, okay, well, I don't believe in mediumship, but I'm just going to be open and curious and read this book anyway. And then I'll make a decision at the end, rather than shutting it down before it's given it a chance.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because people will call themselves skeptics when they're really cynics. And the difference is a skeptic is slow to come to conclusions, but they'll examine the evidence. And so speaking of that, I have another friend, staunch, her actual job was to disprove things. She was a debunker. And she and I became friends on Facebook. And she came to me, she said, I know that mediumship's not real. I don't believe any of it. Tell me the best medium you know, and I'm going to go to her and I'm going to prove that it's not real. I'm going to give her a fake name. I'm going to pay through a third party, and I'm going to prove it's not real. She comes back to me. I gave her the name of my friend. And she's like, wow, she blew me away. And she is a true believer now. And it's funny because she even said the other day, she said, I said there was no evidence for any of this out there. And she goes, there is so much evidence, but people don't know it. They don't know all the research. They don't know that the government did research on remote viewing. They don't know all the experiments that have been done on psi. I mean, psi has been proven in the lab over and over and over again. They can't explain how it works, but they know that it works, that people do have psychic abilities. Dr. Schwartz and Dr. Reichel, they've shown that mediums can get information about deceased people that there's no rational way that they would know. these things are just, they're facts. They're not opinions. They're not
Absolutely.
wishful thinking.
Yeah, absolutely facts. And I think this is really what inspired me to write Red Dress, because a lot of people won't go and read those kinds of books.
Yeah.
There's fabulous, obviously there's some fabulous books out there, but you've got to have the motivation to read them. So what I wanted to do was put some of this into a fun novel. So people could just like go on holiday and sit on the beach and read their fun novel. And the woman in there ends up having an affair, and there's all kind, and she's stressed out, and there's all these things, but there's all these learnings as well. And it's interesting what you said about people, your friend and the medium. There's a scene in the book where there's a love interest that she has ends up going along with her, the main central character, Katie, to have his soul contract read. And he thinks it's a load of old rubbish, and he's hoping that nobody spots him going on, and he's like, I hope nobody sees me doing this. And he goes in to have his soul contract read, and he just thinks, oh, well, I'll get this over and done with just to please her. And then the lady that's doing the soul contract starts talking to him, and she starts telling him about his past. And he's like, his jaw is dropping because he's going, how did you know that? How did you know that? And she's kind of been searching me, she's tagged me or something. So, so I just wanted to kind of show that as well within the different characters, that there are characters in there that think that the central character is going mad and is woo-woo, and then she has to find her niche and find her soul family, if you like. And there's a lot of that kind of there's a lot of things like that where people don't believe things, and then they get shocked when they see it. So I hope people take that to heart when they read it, because this is what I wanted to do, is to kind of get that out there in an easy, enjoyable, light-hearted, entertaining way, rather than somebody having to plough through. Fabulous book, but you have to have the motivation and want to plough through some of those books, which for you and I are great because we love it, but not everybody does. So I want to get people to dip their toes into that world. It's
funny because I read a lot, but I hardly ever read fiction because I just don't have time. There's so much other things, because I'm basically researching all the time. But for other people, as you said, they don't have that mindset or that motivation. And frankly, some of the stuff is boring and some of it's hard to understand. So let's talk about how you weave these themes into Red Dress. So how do you weave these things in?
Well, I get the central character. The central character, I think a lot of women will relate to her. She's in her 40s. She's got 2 teenage children, and her marriage isn't great. And the guy she's married to is a bit of a power-hungry, probably narcissist, possibly slightly psychopathic, but he's definitely dysfunctional. She's trying to hold it all together, and she's a therapist, and she's lost herself. And, I know a lot of your work is about grieving, and I think grieving sometimes is about somebody dear to you that you've lost, and it's this intense sadness. Sometimes you can grieve about the loss of yourself or who you are or a life you had, and that can sometimes be a kickstart into a spiritual journey, and really that's what happens to her. So the fact that she's lost and empty, and she feels guilty that she's lost and empty because she's actually got a successful life materialistically. Right. She's got a nice house in West London, she's successful, but she just feels there's something more. She feels lost, she feels empty, she feels quite depressed. And because she's a therapist, she has the courage to go for therapy. Now, I think it does take courage to say, I'm going to go get some help. I think it takes enormous courage to do that. And that's what she does. And she's because she's a therapist, she has a supervisor, and she says, can you give me some sessions? I think I need to explore some things. So through the sessions, and they're not too long and boring, through those sessions that she has periodically throughout the book with her therapist, we get to understand some of the workings of her mind and what's going on. But she also embarks on this spiritual journey because she's a Reiki master. She meditates, and she's got these parallel paths of being the kind of the rational psychotherapist and the intuitive healer. And she's trying to keep them apart, and eventually they actually come together. These parallel paths come together, but so we can follow her. So she's an interesting character, and she's sort of funny. So she's herself is not sure about this spiritual journey. So she's almost criticizing herself as she goes and going, oh, this is just a load of rubbish. I've just wasted all this money on this thing and it can't be real, And so she's questioning herself all the way, which is, of course, what a lot of people do. So because of that, she gets led on intuitively to all kinds of things. So she actually, I'm probably not giving too much away by saying near the beginning of the book, she hands over to God, and she doesn't even really believe in God because she's not religious, she's spiritual. But she decides that God is omniscient, omnipotent, all-knowing, all-powerful, and everywhere. And so she has this kind of moment where she giggles and she goes, "Oh, that means he knows that I'm thinking about him." And then she ends up in this spur of the moment, because she's so fed up with her life, just handing it over to God. She does it almost as a joke. She's kind of going, let's see what happens, see if he exists, let's see if anything happens. And that sets in motion a whole series of events, which take her through this journey of awakening to who she really is, what's really true for her. She's really lost sight of herself, and she starts finding herself, and she starts finding like-minded friends, and she starts going on reading spiritual books, learning about Tesla, learning about vibrations and frequencies and chakras, and she has a soul reading, and she goes on a journey. And in fact, it's the first of a trilogy of books, so that trilogy will follow her. The first one is really, and this is, I think, how people change. So the first book, Red Dress, is about her waking up, becoming aware, becoming conscious, saying, hang on a minute, there's more to life than this, my life's not working. She then starts to go on a journey of self-awareness and self-discovery. And through that journey, she's learning, and she actually ends up, there's a voice that's talking to her. And I never quite say what the voice is. It could be God, it could be the divine, it could be her God. I never say it's just the voice. But the voice is giving her all this amazing wisdom, like, you can choose your thoughts, and your thoughts and feelings create your reality. And so it's giving her all these wisdom when she has these moments with the voice, which, are peppered throughout the book. So Red Dress is really about her becoming aware, becoming awake, dipping her toe into this journey, which she does with some trepidation because she thinks everybody else is going to laugh at her and think she's woo-woo, and she's worried about other people judging her. But it's really about letting go of the structure of her life that's held her in this place or taken her to where she is, which hasn't worked. And it's that thing, the ladder's against the wrong wall. She's climbed the ladder and she's found it's against the wrong wall. It's not the life she wanted. It's not what she thought it would be. So she's got to dismantle that. So the whole of the first book, Red Dress, is about dismantling that and becoming aware and awake and deciding to go on this spiritual journey. And then the second book, which I'm kind of like about a third of the way through writing, is about old structures completely crashing down around her, and then her going further into her self-healing and rising like a phoenix from the ashes as a very strong person within herself, who believes in herself and who's found who she is and what matters to her. Because I think that's what we all must do. Find out, what are we passionate about? What matters to us? What do we love doing? What lifts us? What feeds us? And that's what she does in the sequel to Red Dress. And then in the third book will be really her stepping into her power and authority and doing what she's come to do in the world. Awesome. So it's a whole kind of transition thing. So and there's lots of stuff in there, like, her going on holiday with her kids and walking and going to the pub and eating food, and she's a wine expert and she's a food buff and she loves dark chocolate and she can't stop eating chocolate from the fridge, and she's very human. She drives too fast and gets a speeding fine, and then she's got a little guide that tells her to slow down, and then she slows down just in time for the speed camera, and she doesn't get the ticket. And there's a whole scene where she's listening to Eckhart Tolle, The Power of Now, in her car while she's driving somewhere, and she's thinking about what she's going to have for supper, and she's got to go and what she's going to give the kids, and did she leave the gas, all things that people do, and she's not listening. Eckhart Tolle's droning on in the background about the power of now. And then she finally goes into the now. And what happens is she's caught by the beauty of the trees in the mist overhanging the English countryside as she's driving. And she just looks at it and she's arrested by the beauty of it. And in doing so, she overshoots her turning, and then she has to kind of career off the highway, and all these people are beeping her. And so it's very, very human and funny and lighthearted. But if you want to, you can take it at a deeper level. So that's how I've unfolded that journey within a novel.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. You use a phrase there I've never heard before, the ladder against the wrong wall. I like that. It's interesting.
I've stolen it from someone, and I can't remember who it is, but one of the sort of motivation people, forgive me, I don't know whether it's Covey
I thought it was a British thing, so you could have taken credit for it.
But, well, I wouldn't do that if it wasn't mine. But I just think I do love the analogy, because that's what so many people do, isn't it? They climb, they climb the ladder, and then they get there and they go, oh.
Yeah, and I like the fact that again, a little bit different, because it's kind of like your life. She's living a good life, but she's awakened just by it's just like this is not everything. Some of us need a knock over the head. Some of us can do it with a gentle nudge. We're kind of running out of time, but before we close, I want to ask you about the bone circle. Tell me about what the bone circle is.
Oh my goodness, I think we're going to need a whole new session for the bone circle, because it's huge. It's actually quite difficult to describe what it is, but it's an entire transformative training. And some of the things we've talked about today around consciousness and around becoming self-aware are included in that bone circle. So it starts with the premise, or the truth bomb that I would call it, that we are all powerful creators. And we create whether we're conscious of it or not. So either we create misery for ourselves and everything we don't want, or we choose, that goes back to choice, choose to create what we do want. But a lot of people don't know what they do want. Their ladder's against the wrong wall, but they don't know actually which wall they want to be against. They've got no clue, because they're so stuck and trapped in what society expects of them that they have no idea. So it works a lot with, we work a lot with intuition, to train people to use their intuition at will, to be able to see their truth, and to then be able to bring that to life. So there's a lot of work around creating, how we create. So we can either be in what I call the reactive or responsive orientation, where we're reacting and responding to things that are happening. So we're reacting to, I'm late for work, or I'm stuck in traffic, or whatever's going on externally, or what's going on internally. Oh, I'm afraid, or I'm angry, or whatever. So, and we react to those things and respond to those things, because we're in that small self. So it's about so the part of the bone circle is about understanding that, and understanding how that small self plays out, and what it does, and what your beliefs are, and what your Enneagram is, and what it does, and what your patterns are, so that you can become aware of them, and then make a choice to be in the creative orientation, which is where you're not trying to fix problems, you're not trying to respond to what's going on, you're choosing to create something. Now that could be a thing like a book or a podcast or a website, or it could be a relationship, a good relationship, or it could be stillness, or a practice of meditation, or something like that. So it's about just going for end results and visions which are true for you at soul level. So it's really understanding your soul purpose, what you come here for, what you love doing. And the purpose isn't some great big thing. It's probably something you've always done because you love it, and you haven't realized that. So it's an awakening. The bone circle is an awakening. The reason it's called bone circle as well is because it is a circle, so people help and support each other, because it goes back to that African proverb. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So we go together, so that you've got a whole load of people supporting you, because it's extremely difficult to pull out of that conditioning and do things that your little self is screaming at you, you can't do it.
Right.
Who do you think you are, writing a book? So you have your this whole sort of fellowship or sisterhood that is helping you through that, which I think is so important. We need to all support each other and help each other, because we are all connected. So together we rise. And this is how, together we're powerful, and it's time now at this time. So Bone Circle is partly about creating and intuition and soul purpose. It's partly about a little bit of therapy stuff that I give people if they need to unhook stuff from the past, process trauma, be free of things. And also a little bit of metaphysical and spiritual stuff around things like, eat well, drink water, exercise, spend time in nature, meditate. And all of those things. And I also bring in, I really love working with sacred names and sacred chants, because they carry like the most incredible vibration. We're talking about vibration and Tesla, and those and sacred names and sacred chants, whatever language they're in, carry just the most beautiful and sublime vibration. And when you work with those, it raises your vibration. And you can use them for protection. You can use them for guidance. You can call, I mean, a lot of people call upon Archangel Michael, for example, to protect them if they're going into hospital right now or if they're going anywhere. You know, these are real, I would say they're mind forces. They're huge collective mind forces. But if we want to see them as an angel with wings, that's fine, because that's how we understand it.
Right.
But we can also call upon the divine and call upon these names and work with those, and that will shift our energy and shift our perspective and shift our consciousness, open it. So it's a kind of a combination of all of those, but the entire training works on these sets of truth bombs about life.
Yeah.
Which is
so
kind of higher wisdom.
I'm sorry, we probably are running out of time. I could talk to you all day. We got through about half of what I wanted to cover. So what I want to do is give you a chance. How can people find out more about you, more about what you do? How can people reach you?
Best place to reach me is on my website, which is www.bridgetfinklaire.com. And Bridget Finklaire is Bridget, so it's like bridge with a T on the end, Bridget, F for Freddie, Imklaire. It's an unusual name. So I'm the only one. I think my family are the only Finklaires in the world. So you will find me, bridgetfinklaire.com. I'm also on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Instagram. I've got an author page on Facebook as well. And if you can't remember that name, johnhuntpublishing.com is my publisher, and they're probably easier to remember, and you should be able to find them from there. The book is Red Dress, the training is the Bone Circle, and it's all there on my website. I think that's the best place to get me.
Awesome. And I will definitely put links to both in the show notes so people can see it there, and I'll put it in the YouTube notes also. Bridget, it's been an absolute pleasure meeting you and having this conversation. I wish we had a couple of hours to talk, but if you want, I'll definitely like to have you back to continue. We can talk more about the Bone Circle and all the things we didn't get to.
I would love that. Thank you so much for having me as your guest. I have so enjoyed it. It's been brilliant to meet you, Brian. Thank you so much. I look forward to talking to you again, because I think we could easily fill another hour. We've got so much in common.
Yeah, without a doubt. Have a great rest of your day.
And you.
Thanks for listening to Grief to Growth. Brian hopes that you find this episode helpful and will come back for future episodes. Brian's best-selling book, Grief to Growth, Planted Not Buried, is a great resource for anyone who is coping with grief or knows someone who is. If you enjoy the podcast and would like to support it, there are 3 things you can do to help. The first is to share the podcast with someone that you think it will help. The second is to go to iTunes, rate, and review the episode. The third way you can support the podcast is by becoming a patron. Head over to www.patreon.com/grief2growth. That's patreon.com/grief, the number 2, growth, and sign up to make a small monthly donation. Patrons get access to exclusive bonus content and knowledge that you are helping to spread the message of grief to growth. For more about Brian and Grief to Growth, visit www.grief2growth.com.
Hi there. I hope you enjoyed this latest episode of the podcast, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. What questions came up for you? What did you like about it? What didn't you like about it? I invite you to visit us at grieftogrowth.circle.so. That's grief2growth.circle.so to continue the conversation with me and with other listeners. It's a space to sound off, to share reactions, and to go deeper into the topics from the show. I look forward to chatting more, and I hope to see you there.